All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for actually staying on this session because I know it's just us hanging between you and lunch. So appreciate everyone staying awake for a bit. And here's a little bit of a tongue twister title: "Who Let the Lead Out?" And it's going to be, a panel of experts here. So I'm pretty excited, and it's also a really important topic. Not that any water topic is not important, but just thinking about lead toxicity and really looking at the impact of lead in our lives, I think is fairly something that we want to dive into. And today we have Chuck Hansen. I'm not going to do an intro for each one of these fantastic panelists. You're going to directly hear from them. We are not going to be doing any slides either. So it's going to be an engaging conversation. And who knows, I might just pick a few of you to come up here for questions. So depends. Just be aware. And really looking at, we have Michelle and Rajan, who you're going to hear a lot about how their partnership worked from a utility perspective, and then Eric Schwartz from Blue Conduit. So we're going to hear different aspects about this panel from a lead perspective. And so to kickstart, I just want to see from the audience here around the utilities, how many utilities are sort of planning any sort of lead identification in your infrastructure or sort of removal in the next 5 years? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, a few. What about utilities who are thinking about it, have already started budgeting for it in the next 3 years? Okay. And anyone who's already, identified it, has, all of your planning done and is in complete execution mode for the next 12 months. Okay. So I think thank you for sharing that, by the way. And who are probably the solution providers actually focusing on the lead part in the audience? Okay, that's great. Chuck, Eric and Chuck, both your heads are up. So no pressure there. And I think it's important to sort of really get to know the audience here, because talking to different utilities, people are in very different stages. There's some amount of confusion, but there's also some amount of clarity, and it's really good to kind of hustle on how we look at these ideas together. So what I would love for each one of our speakers to do today, so I'm going to start with Chuck. And what I want to hear, Chuck, is just kind of go and share a little bit more about, what specifically your work in ElectroScan is and where ElectroScan is really diving in this space. And maybe one other question for the audience to get to know you better. What in your life, in terms of purpose, brought you into the world of water? Because I think we all have a why, and that's what makes water people so committed and dedicated and passionate in this room. So it would be great for the audience to connect to you with your why.
Well,
so go for it.
Great. I'll start with that. I was actually poor boyed into getting into the business. I was gonna be somebody, a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and my father had a heart attack, and we had a little business called Hansen Software back in 1980. We did work orders for water and sewer agencies. Yeah, I'm 66. So I told the VCs that I would only be up there for a month or two to close down the business, and finally sold the business 27 years later. So that was how I got into the business. ElectroScan was a little bit different because I got a phone call from Dr. Ken Carey. Many of you know he wrote the EPA manuals on water and wastewater, and he asked me, Chuck, we're having trouble with our cured in place pipe finding defects. And I said, well, what does the CCTV have? He says, Chuck, CCTV can't assess sewers. I go, Ken, really? I mean, I made a fortune on CCTV. He says, no. He says, we need a new technology. And that was ElectroScan. Fast forward a couple of years ago, Water Research Federation, I'm not sure if we have any representatives here, did two interesting studies. One was on the fact that there were no commercially available products to find buried lead pipe. And the second study was actually the success of using and measuring electrical resistance to locate the difference between copper and lead pipe. So we decided, given our products for water and sewer, we decided that we'd have to downsize our products we're using on larger diameter pipes. We, of course, had to get into pressurized systems. And we also had to make sure we could do multiple 90-degree bends. And so I actually present to you the world's first device to locate buried lead pipes with 100% accuracy. This is called a swordfish. We're not really releasing it until AWWA. I just happened to have one, so I thought I'd come out and show you about how you can now find buried lead pipe in your area down to half an inch. So that's my story.
Awesome, Chuck. And I'm curious to learn more about the swordfish later, depending on how much you plan to share today. But Eric, tell us a little bit more about, the work Blue Conduit is doing and how you're sort of approaching this problem and, your journey of what made you get into water.
Thank you. I'll get this one. Thank you. Thanks, Meena, and thanks, everyone. I'll start with the journey because I think that feeds into what Blue Conduit is really doing and where we come from. In 2016, as the Flint water crisis had hit national and international news and that media attention started to wane, my colleague and I from the University of Michigan went up to Flint and started just asking some questions and see if there's any way that we as professional data scientists and machine learning experts might be able to lend a hand. And the question was, well, how many folks actually have lead contamination in their homes? The answer is we don't really know. Well, it's coming from the pipe, so how many homes have these lead pipes? We don't really know. And really since then, 6 years ago, we've been obsessed with that uncertainty and those unknowns that utilities across the country have. Because it's one thing to say we're removing the lead that we know about, but it's completely other to say we're also removing all the lead that we don't yet know about. And so our work in Flint, a disadvantaged community, continues to inform the work that we've been doing nationwide in 50 plus cities around North America with a focus on disadvantaged communities, being we want to prevent the Flints of the world and really focus on environmental justice. From a kind of solution and outcome perspective, what are we delivering? Well, what Blue Conduit really focuses on is resolving that uncertainty to help you manage as utilities or your the engineering firms to help your clients manage that uncertainty, to get these inventories done on time, to get public communication clear. Everyone needs to now send annual messages to residents based on the EPA's lead and copper rule revisions if they have lead or if they have unknown materials. To be more cost effective, there's a certain amount of money coming in, and whether it's SRF money, whether it's local money, you need to stretch those dollars as far as you can. And so what we're doing is we're lining up the addresses and the blocks of the city where you should be going first, where are you most likely to be finding as much lead as possible to reduce the time that people are living with lead, but also get the biggest ROI on your dollars. So you're not wasting time digging holes, coordinating, restoring, just filling them back in and finding copper. And so in the absence of widespread adoption of swordfishes of the world and other things that can do that, I would say that we're dealing with uncertainty and we should manage that uncertainty the way other fields do. It's with numbers and statistics. So using best practices in statistics, machine learning is the way to deal with it, because we're not going to get certainty everywhere tomorrow. We're not going to get perfect information everywhere at the end of this year, right? So we need to manage that appropriately, and it's also just the right thing to do in terms of communication and doing the most good that we can with the dollars that we're going to have. So that's what Blue Conduit is about.
Who do you want next?
Yeah, thanks. All right, thanks. And first off, just grateful to be with these terrific panelists. Nice to have a fun group to work with here. I'll start with the why. My personal why is, like, I was a little bit of an aimless kid graduating high school, got into college as a philosophy and an art major. My first year, and I was dabbling and thinking of going into dental hygiene based off of, for various reasons. And then went to, did periodic trips to India, went to India that summer, and just kind of, it clicked, like the load shedding, kind of the intermittent water supply, to the horrible environmental conditions of the traffic. It's like, environmental is kind of where it's at. Environmental engineering, civil engineering is what I switched to. And then fortunately, when I graduated, there was a software company kind of right next to my hometown where I grew up. And they did civil engineering software. So this is like it was late 90s. And I walked in, and this person kind of reminds me of you, Chuck, who's the president of the company. Hawaiian shirt, no shirt underneath, button, no shoes. And he kind of gave me a few questions like, so why do you want to work here? I kind of said, kind of gave my answers, like hired me on the spot. And, from there I was in kind of the digital water space since then. Brings me to now, so with a company called Trinnex. It's we recently launched about 5 months ago, but we're a wholly owned subsidiary of CDM Smith. So CDM Smith's a relatively large consulting firm, and they've been doing a lot of work with not just lab, but just digital solutions. So we have they developed a digital twin platform for a few clients that we're like, other utilities can benefit from. And then they've been really leading in the lead removal space. So there's some pretty big projects. They completed about a dozen projects, but some of the big ones is Newark, New Jersey recently. And that one, they replaced something like 23,000 lead service lines within 3 years. So like a tremendous effort. And a whole program and a whole technology database, everything kind of came together, to the people, to funding, to the people at the utility, to contractors. It was a huge undertaking and a lot of lessons learned. And that's where Trinnex and Leadcast is a software that we have kind of formed. So we found that there was a lot of repeatable steps. And since every single utility in the US needs to do some sort of thing for the regulation, they need to have some sort of inventory or more if they have lead. Like, let's make it easy for them to do so. And so it has some equity mapping to machine learning and things like that. But yeah, it's a little bit of the part around the lead side. So yeah.
I'm Michelle Koch with the City of Salem, Virginia Water Department. And today I stand among giants, giant utilities, giant tech companies. I'm here because of Trinnex, and they have much larger clients than us, as do Chuck and Eric could have both brought large utilities to talk about large-scale lead detection and abatement projects, and that's not us. We have a population of less than 30,000, which those of you who are dealing with the new EPA lead and copper rule knows puts us below some of the requirements. But we have more than 10,000 people, which puts us with most of the others. Salem wants to provide clean, safe, reliable drinking water. We are subject to Virginia Health Department regulations, and every year our plant gets the Gold Award from Virginia Department of Health. We want to make sure that same Gold Award water is what is delivered to customers, all customers, every day. Personally, I've worked for the city of Salem for 6 years as their utility asset manager. And when I come here and people hear, oh, you're speaking on lead, you must be really into lead or have a lot of lead. No, we don't have a team, we don't have a department. I am the asset manager. This is a competing project and priority amongst a lot of things, as some of you in this room are aware, and many of you, your smaller clients, you know, you're dealing with competing priorities. It's not just lead. Lead is one more thing amongst many. My passion for water doesn't come from that. My passion for water came from a high school science project called Why Won't My Creek Freeze?, in which I investigated non-point source pollution control. So I've migrated from stormwater to, I went to tech to be a biological systems engineer, ended up in civil engineering. It wasn't until I was working for a consulting firm that I discovered piped water and sewer and modeling. This is the best thing ever, modeling and analysis and prediction, and from there asset management. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and I will talk more about Salem and lead. I'm sure more questions will come up.
Awesome. You guys can rotate the mic so that way there's. So Michelle, no, really inspiring, and also thank you for sharing. You know, when you think about all the statistics that are coming on, sort of like lead, with the most recent lead copper rule, and also looking at how can utilities be aggressively sort of handling this issue. I think Michelle, probably just want you to go first. What are your thoughts about that?
It's not like small utilities were waiting for a rule. And everybody, if they weren't concerned before Flint, they were certainly concerned after Flint. Everybody was going, what do we have? What do we know we have? We don't know. I'd never heard of a tap card before working with Trinnex. What's a tap card? We have no record of customer side service. We have limited records of our own service on the city side for service lines. There are a lot of drivers in what we do, but yeah, everybody wants to get ahead of this issue. We did actually, ahead of this, test all of our schools and our identifying daycares and that side of things. But after Flint, when we're asking field crew, which is our best source of intel, where's our lead? Do we have lead? They're saying we have never seen a lead service, period. We've never seen one. Our head of field operations, who's been there for approximately 33 years and is getting ready to retire, to these guys, I say, we have a trained neural network. His name is Andy. And he said that we had fewer than 1 in 1,000 lead lines. But fewer than 1 in 1,000 is not zero. We started doing an AMI project right as the pandemic hit, and with that, a complete meter replacement as well. And we were very lucky. Our installers tracked the data as they were installing. So for 80% of our service lines, we now have both customer side and city side line material, provided that those installers knew what they were looking at and could see it in the meter box. And I heard from Las Vegas earlier that that's not adequate for them. This works in Virginia, but apparently in Las Vegas, you have to go 18 inches from the meter pit. So our solution won't work for everybody. We've heard from some utilities, even in places that do allow that they plan to test pit everything. That's not practical for a lot of small utilities, a lot of spread utilities, for utilities where the meters are in the buildings. So everybody's got to come up with their own solution on this. But I will go ahead and tell you from what we found, we have 1 lead service line on the city side. We have a handful on the customer side, which we now have to figure out how to mitigate, remediate, and replace.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And we'll come back to you on some of the communication questions. But Chuck, when you hear some of these metrics of 60% of schools have lead in their pipes and things that you're just reading generically on Google as your source, And the Safe Drinking Water Act says basically now they're reduced the maximum allowable lead content to be a weighted average of 0.25% calculated across a bunch of pipes and fittings. How, as Electroscan, as one of the sort of solution experts, how are you guys able to help utilities sort of address both the requirements from lead copper rule, but like rightfully Michelle said, no one's been waiting for a rule to actually make this right. How are you looking at it from the utilities in terms of helping them?
It's interesting in that utilities aren't really the problem, because over the last 50 years we've probably had $1 trillion invested in service lines, and they've been through private contractors, plumbers, whoever. So the folks that have been digging up lead and maybe replacing it with copper or with galvanized steel or plastic, what have you, really hasn't had anything to do with utilities. Electroscan was interesting. We started seeing these readings. We've done about 5,000 miles of pipe in the US and the UK. And we started seeing these blips on asbestos cement pipes. And of course, from a utility standpoint, we used a lot of lead to seal those joints. In fact, I can go on YouTube right now, even though it's not legal, I can find out from plumbers how to melt lead. So I've got little lead ingots so I can go and do exactly that, solder joints with lead all over the country. So this is not stopping. So what we're finding is, although utilities do have this issue, we're looking at service lines only. We're not looking at any of the mains. In fact, people don't even, I know cities that don't even like to say asbestos on their maps. They don't like AC on the maps. They call it CA. I go, what's CA? Because they don't want that word out. So we've got other issues, but focusing now on lead, I get just as many calls from California utilities that have no lead pipe and that want something to prove to their clients. They just want something so that the crews can go out and actually do a quick study, insert into a pipe just to show, look, your pipe isn't lead. And so there's a lot of different factors that are going in, whether we're coming in from a curb stop or coming in from the meter and doing that. And nobody wants to pothole and deal with customers digging up their front yard, the mess, the dirt. It just really has been problematic. So everybody has been looking for some other way to deal with that. So there's a number of things that are going on. I'm not sure the current replacement strategies will cut it, because I do believe, like in Flint, we are going to have homes with high lead readings that don't have lead services. And the problem is going to be upstream. And eventually we're going to kick the can down, as we normally do in DC. We'll kick the can down and finally take care of that. So I think it's just going to be a lot of business as usual, but at least we'll take care of the most obvious things if we can find that. So I think that's the interesting dynamics I'm seeing.
So a follow-up question to that, Chuck. What do you think the rule has actually helped achieve?
I think it's done a lot of visibility for companies like Blue Conduit to inventory and know that we have. I mean, I've known Jack Dangerman for 30 years. I loved how ESRI came up with what was called the near command. You know what the near command was? That was where I had a polygon, let's call it a parcel, and I would go to the middle of that parcel, and the near command would put that parcel directly to whatever pipe was close to it. Because I did go to the expense of doing the sewer main or the water main. And of course, 6 out of 10 times, the parcel was not connected to that main. It was in the back easement or some other location or across the other side of the street. So it's really brought up how horrible our records still are today. And how our records really need to be cleansed. That still needs to happen. And again, as Blue Conduit would say, if I've got a lead pipe on one side of me and another lead pipe on the other, there's probably a good chance I have lead pipe. But I'm still going to want to get it tested, because I did have a plumber because I had an issue, and he was down there. And of course, we know plumbers, if I've got 50 feet from the meter to the main, he put in 60 feet of pipe, right? Because he gets paid by the foot. So that's why I have to have something that goes and deals with multiple bends and curls and things, because that contractor got paid for 60 feet of pipe, and that's never going to be on the map. So it's a can of worms. We want to kind of deal with what the EPA has graciously looked at first. I think it's fantastic. But there are going to be unintended consequences when we get down the path for this.
Eric, your thoughts on this, especially as Blue Conduit was one of the winners of the National Data Prize. For folks who are not aware, the entire Water Data Prize was run by Epic, so you've certainly have a lead in how you're actually doing the insights and how you can actually make it actionable for utilities in a most cost-effective manner. So what are your thoughts, Eric, as we move into more of the data visualization and inventory part of it?
Sure, thank you, and thanks to the other panelists. I think this is a multifaceted problem, and we need a lot of hands on deck. And there will be partnerships and creative solutions that come out of the partnerships. But what I think is critical to focus on is, to solve these problems, there needs capital, there needs to be money. And one of the first challenges that a lot of folks here might be thinking about, either for their systems or their client systems, is how do I get access to the $15 billion of federal infrastructure money that's coming to solve this lead inventory and replacement problem? And well, a really great way to make your application to your state revolving fund compelling would be an estimate of how big this problem is and how much money you need to solve it. But that's actually not trivial. That's not easy. And to get the first pass, just an estimate of how many lead pipes do we have with credible information to back it up. So a full analysis of all existing data, and then filling in all those unknowns with probabilities. So what we really do is, for every unknown service line, whether it's one portion, the public side or the private side, or even a gooseneck, if there's enough data on the gooseneck alone, we're putting probability of that component of the service line at this address being lead or galvanized versus not needing replacement. And so by having that, you're able to immediately start looking at, well, how big is this problem? How much money do I need? Great, I've got the funding now. Now, next, I've got to make some sort of plan. So in order to say we're going to replace 12,000 lead pipes over the next 4 years to the public and to the regulator, as is required to make these kinds of plans, you've got to really have a sense of how much do we have and where are they? Mm-hmm. One of the challenges that we've seen in dozens of cities we've worked with is the existing data doesn't tell the full picture. And we know this already, right? There's lots of unknowns, got it. But even if you just go wherever there's been meter changeouts, or wherever there's been water main replacements, or wherever people have voluntarily said, hey, I think I have a lead service line, or I do have a lead service line, come and take it out, and paid for it, that is not representative of your entire public water system. That it is, in fact, probably skewing possibly away from the neighborhoods that are most likely to have the lead. Yeah. And so this equity component aligns very nicely with your cost effectiveness and just reducing time that people are living with lead. And so by addressing those issues, really have to come to see there's a lot more to these unknowns. And that's something that we layer in is accounting for that lack of representativeness. How can we adjust and make predictions? But it's not a one-off prediction. This is the last thing I would say. This is a continuous iterative process. The project is not give predictions for every home and then go away. It's to make it actionable, as you asked, you're going to have to tell contractors and crews to go, maybe several sets of crews to go to addresses. Practically speaking, you just need to give them addresses where to go, or blocks to close off the street, and where to permit. And so you have to work your way down the top of that list and find as much lead as possible, as early as possible, to make those crews as effective as possible at getting the lead out.
Yeah, inspiring, Eric. Thank you. Michelle and Rajan, how do you foresee in terms of the partnership that Trinnex and City of Salem, have been able to sort of build here and leverage that to be more proactive while also addressing some of the equity concerns? And City of Salem, regardless of size, has been kind of leading in not having lead, per se. So just your thoughts on, what can others in the audience sort of take away from that partnership with, the folks that they're working?
Yeah, so part of the regulation is under populations under 50,000 served, they have to, if they're asked, they have to publicly notify, or you have to give some sort of notification there's lead in their location or the area. And so over 50,000, you have to have a public-facing dashboard of where the lead pipes are in the whole program. And so folks like Michelle and Salem, they're under that 50,000 range. And, the thought is they're being proactive, knowing it's going to take person hours to do any type of notification on a one-to-one manual basis. Why not develop a inventory and have a public dashboard to kind of cut it off at the pass? So I think that I commend them for kind of being taking that initiative and having that foresight to go that direction. I think Michelle could probably talk a little bit more about kind of the specifics of the system. Yes.
So the question was how to be proactive and how to get other people on board with being proactive, which means I'm mainly speaking to people not in this room, right? The people in this room are on the proactive end. So to the other small utilities who aren't required to put a public-facing dashboard, if you have the opportunity to work with a system that can create that for you, you're better off doing that, because in small utilities, if you don't, it's going to be individual customers calling your director or your city manager personally going, do I have a lead line? Or what does this mean? Because there are unknown unknowns and then there are known unknowns. So we have places where we know that we don't know, and we've got to notify those people. So getting ahead of it in a way that is comprehensive and non-alarmist is important. The other thing, going back to the equity portion, which there again, we're in a bit better situation because our AMI project does cover the entire city. Lead is durable, malleable, and if you're not looking for it specifically, it's not breaking. You're not getting leaks at your lead service lines. You're not getting blowouts at your lead goosenecks because they're non-corrosive. It would be almost the perfect plumbing material if it weren't for the fact that you're slowly poisoning your customers potentially. We fortunately have very hard water as well, which does help with the not poison your customers aspect. But being proactive in, as soon as we find it, fortunately we do have the philosophy of, we find it, we're going to fix it, period. That is, a lot of small utilities want to do that. Whether it's possible to do that is partly having a defensible system where you can look at a tool and say, this is what is indicated. Now we can go on to talk to customers about looking at their unknown lines, and then you're messing up a smaller number of people's yards, hopefully with their understanding and what would be a good word for that? Not just understanding, but that they want to be proactive too. That they don't feel like it's a waste.
Thank you, Michelle. So I know we're coming up on time. So before we wrap up, a quick round of what would be, maybe Eric, we start with you, sort of your key takeaway for the audience in terms of, if you're a utility or a service provider, a solution provider, maybe one key takeaway for each. Would love to hear your thoughts.
For each stakeholder?
Yep.
For
just one for a utility and one for a solution provider. I think we have more providers than utilities in the audience, at least for this session at the moment.
Sure. Say one to utilities is, as you are thinking about approaches to do this, you're going to encounter lots of talk about data and lots of talk of prediction, very likely, and accuracy. And I would really, really, really encourage folks to ask for proof. Show me the evidence that this works, that you can tell me there is likely lead and it will be likely lead. So when there's a notion of reliability on probability, so ask, if it says 70%, that means that 7 out of 10 of the addresses with 70% should have lead and 3 shouldn't. Really being thoughtful about how to buy and source these approaches. To engineers and other solution providers, I think thinking really flexibly about how to incorporate this work into your existing dashboards and platforms, and when is the right time to kind of bring in other partners, because I think we all have our specialties and specialization, and some are really flexible at populating dashboards, and others are more of the builders of these platforms. But
it's kind of summarizing, challenging the authenticity of the data.
Oh, absolutely.
For the other utilities in the room, online, and elsewhere, we're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm. So if you are trying to prove a negative, push your locality and your state and your country to allow these technologies as an alternative to potholing. Work with your customers to get ahead of public perception and to turn this into an opportunity for engagement. To the suppliers of solutions on the stage and in the audience, thank you all. There are all kinds of different niches to be filled. There's a lot of space out there for a lot of solutions. So thank you all.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, for the utilities, we had some discussions about regulations, how they're a mix of the carrot and the stick, and how that is beneficial in some ways, and then sometimes it's just annoying to deal with. In cases like lead, or in the EU, like the Net Zero Initiative or the AMP cycle, like the ones that we feel are thriving are the ones that are using these as opportunities to move something along during their digital journey. And it's kind of a little bit of a twofer. So for the digital providers, consultants, we're all kind of in that, like it or not, we're all in some sort of digital journey too. So like these initiatives of actually something that's impactful for the community, you know, water quality, from reducing these lead service lines to addressing climate change through net zero initiatives, is a great way to start kind of getting those drivers into to push along the digital initiatives going. So like that, I love the term digital first resiliency, because every time there's a problem that even, you know, all organizations, all stakeholders in this room, if you set up a digital framework, and it may, of course, start small and kind of get those wins, you'll be able to have a sustainable way of addressing new problems as they come up.
I have a client in the East, and despite the best desktop system that they did, and the media coverage pulls me off the side, and he goes, "Chuck, we've already taken out $15 million of copper pipe. How can I keep doing this?" So this panel is, and we know the EPA is 100% removal of lead. We are also in the business of 0% removal of good pipe, copper, plastics, whatever else we're putting in. So, because that is going to take money out of your pocket fast if you're not making those decisions. And I agree with Eric. You've got to be able to prove and be 100%. Even with a swordfish, we have our guys say, and we've looked at 3M. They've got a lead test. By having an actual device that goes in, we always do things by belt and suspenders. We want to make sure before we dig that thing up, yes, we've got lead down there. So the ability of having an unambiguous decision of yes, there is or not is absolutely critical. You've got to make that. You've got to make these dollars last. So you're getting a bonanza of funds to make this happen, consultants and utilities. So, let's bring the right tools to the right job.
Awesome, Chuck. So before we roll it over for a few questions, as part of the panel and wrapping up, my name is Meena Sankaran. I'm the founder and CEO of KETOS. And, alongside of Chuck and Eric, KETOS actually delivers real-time water quality intelligence, and specifically to lead contaminant detection down to about 1 part per billion or 2 part per billion level of sensitivity. And very much as, Chuck described, pretty much on-site, on-field, it's a robot that essentially is giving you lead data. And it's been exciting to be alongside Blue Conduit as well, doing some of the work in AI where we're able to provide lead mapping across the US specific to infrastructure. So 100% agree, Chuck, that you want 0% of good pipe being taken out while you're having removal issues. So with that, please join me in giving a big round of applause for these fantastic panelists and experts. And over to questions. I know everyone's getting pretty hungry up there with lunch being served outside, but we'd love to have at least a couple of questions here for the audience. Yeah, go for it.
I just want to echo and say thanks to SWAN for organizing such a great panel. You guys have a really interesting perspective on this issue. And I'm from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So I'm on the West Coast, and it's not really a lead problem. It's kind of the thing we say over there. But we do have to comply with the storm of regulations, like you stated. And one thing that I was surprised to hear was that we actually are doing the meter replacement. So we're asking our field crews to identify visually what it looks like. And it's an archaic system right now. They're doing it by hand, and we're trying to digitize it. I know, I got it. I know the shock is crazy for me too. But we got to get started, right, by 2024 compliance dates. But I was surprised to hear that it has to be 18 inches, and I think you referenced something in Nevada. Yeah, you were one-on-one talk. I get it. So I'm wondering, did the EPA give the states discretionary authority to make like these kinds of calls? And if so, can I just comment more on that? I'm just curious because we're kind of assuming, is it like a baseline for everybody in the country, or is it discretionary per state that we have to like adjust? And then that translates into the kind of technology and alternatives that each state might accept. Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand. Thanks.
Yes. So some states, because yes, the EPA has said you need to provide this lead inventory, and then it has been left up to the states as to what qualifies as a accurate or appropriate source of that data. What are they going to accept? So some states are very open to predictive modeling as a way of identifying likely lead or likely not. Others are willing to accept historical records, building codes at the time to show that certain places can be ruled out as being lead. And other places are no, it's got to be eyes on. You've got to have an actual indicator, whether it's an actual record from installation or somebody going back and test holing them.
Yeah. So states have that discretion. Now they can't go below the EPA line, but they're going above it, and different ones are doing different things. I would just point your attention to in the preamble to the the lead and copper rule revisions, as written in 2021, they encourage predictive modeling, verbatim in it. It says it, EPA. Don't expect other states to just come out and say, we accept Trinnex or Electro or Blue Conduit. That's not going to happen. Or like to specify the exact kind of analysis that they will accept. But think of instead, just you need to do something. So how are you going to report that you have 0 lead pipes or a small number of lead if you find them? Well, it's not going to be by digging everywhere in Los Angeles, for example, or even looking in every pipe in Los Angeles. You have to say something about all the areas you haven't gone to. And that's really where we come in, is to say, since you do have to go and do some physical verifications, where should you go to get the biggest bang for your buck? So you might want to know, where across LA should we go so that once we get, yes, copper, can we make the strongest claim that we have all copper here, right? And that's exactly the kind of analysis baked into the software that Blue Conduit provides. And I don't just don't think that's anywhere else, right? Because we're the nerds that invented this whole approach of using machine learning to find lead.
I don't want to keep people from lunch, but so the big emphasis has really been on lead service line replacement, which is very important. But our organization, in addition to working with rural utilities, also do a lot of work with water quality in schools. And I know that there are special programs and funding out there, and would love to hear from any of you, any of the things that you're looking at on how you can help schools overcome some of those challenges that go beyond lead service line replacement. Oh, Sarah Buck from the Rural Community Assistance Partnership.
From the utility perspective, I said before that we've gotten ahead of that as far as proactively testing schools and identifying daycares as a part of this. And then I'll turn it over to talk about tracking that in Trinnex and modeling. But yeah, I apologize for not knowing this, but there is some other set of either regulations or policies out there for us in Virginia that's a 3T program for schools. That is, the T's are like training, testing, and some T that means mitigation or replacement. So.
Yeah. So yeah, it's real quick. So I think some of these solution providers up here, we have to try to make it easy to kind of go through that workflow with schools. There's kits that can get sent out and then sent to a lab. I think some of the vendors up here have connections with the labs. They do their processing. Our database connects to their database, and it's updated in the public-facing dashboard, and then kind of routinely is live updates. So, in terms of the technical aspect, there's some workflows in place, just a little bit make it easy for some of the smaller communities out there.
Sarah, I also wanted to give you another example of where we've worked with select schools where we actually go. So the principals are usually the ones who bring in. So it's actually at the school level, sometimes at the county school district level, because then they have multiple schools and kind of working through that. Usually it stems from someone has actually made a formal complaint, and that triggers a series of action beyond just what the facilities have traditionally been doing. And that leads us to kind of do a deeper dive where we would have a field system installed and actually monitoring lead, copper, arsenic, and probably an extension of a few heavy metals just in that realm, so that we can be a little more proactive. And so we've seen that, and that usually goes against some sort of a fund that the school can actually capture. And most recently, they've been able to use the COVID-related fund because that's, again, part of like reopening schools, and that's associated with how that water is coming into that school. So that's something that we have seen applicable for the schools in a quick way for them to, not feel like they can't provide something, but with budgets and other competing priorities, but actually make a difference. And then they are able to take that data and report it to their parents. So then it's very much at a ground level of, okay, parents, here's what we're doing for your school. And that is something that's replicable school by school or at a school district level.